So we already covered the basic elements of rhythm, but we worked it out on a timeline. We never actually used standard notation. And by standard notation, I mean these, the notes you're probably used to seeing. We also ignored the fact that rhythm could be played at different speeds. So we're going to look at those two things, and we're also going to look at how to play notes that last for only part of a beat. Let's start with this idea that a rhythm can be played fast or slow. Last lesson, we laid out a few notes on this timeline. We measured them out in beats, like this. And we decided that each beat would last for about half of a second, which sounded about like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if we shortened the beats, say to a third of a second, then playing through this rhythm would take a lot less time. It would sound more like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, everything would still fit together in the same way. These first two notes are still equal in length, and this third note is still twice as long as either of these two. Making the beat shorter just speeds up the music, sort of like putting it on fast forward. And if we made the beats longer, everything would slow down, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you refer to the speed of the beats as tempo. So a fast tempo means that the beats are short and the music moves quickly, and a slow tempo means the beats are long and the music moves slowly. Now I've been measuring beat length in seconds just to make things simple, but generally, tempo is measured in beats per minute. So if our song had a tempo of 120 beats per minute, that would mean that in 1 minute, we should have covered 120 beats. So if you think about it, that works out to a half second per beat. Now if our tempo was 60 beats per minute, that would be a full second for every beat, which would be very slow. Now the best way to measure out these tempos is to use a metronome, which looks like this. Now you set it for whatever tempo you want, in this case 120, and when you turn it on, it will click at the beginning of each beat. So if I count along to the metronome, I can play at exactly 120 beats per minute. Which sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or whatever tempo I want to play at. That's the basic idea of tempo. Now we'll be playing things at different tempos as we go on, but let's start looking at actual notation now. We're going to rebuild our timeline out of notes like these. Each one of these is going to last for a different number of beats. So let's look at this one first. This is called a whole note, and it's the longest out of all of these. Now you might be thinking, well, how many beats does it last for? And the answer is that we don't know. There's no set value of beats this note lasts for. We have to have a time signature to tell us how many it gets. Now time signatures look like this. They're two numbers stacked on top of each other. Now, we'll go in depth on time signatures next lesson, but for today, assume that we picked the magic time signature that makes this whole note last for 4 beats, whatever that might be. Now, don't memorize that a whole note equals 4 beats, because it only equals 4 beats when we have the right time signature. But if we determine that a whole note is 4 beats, we can figure out what all the other notes last for. So this next note is called a half note. And if a whole note equals 4 beats, then a half note will equal 2. This note is going to be half of however many beats a whole note is. Now a quarter note, this next one, will last for 1 beat. Same thing, you're just cutting it in half again. And this last one, eighth note, would last for exactly half of a beat. And remember, we'll be looking at partial beats in a minute. So if we have our magic time signature and we've determined what all these notes last for, then we can rebuild our timeline with these. So here's our timeline again. And to start, we would need a quarter note, which would last for 1 beat. We would need another quarter note, which will last for this beat. And then here we would need a half note, which should last for 2. So if we played this, it would still sound the same. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4. And we could string together any number of these to represent our rhythms. We would still group them in measures, and we'd still use the counting system to figure out how to play them. So, last thing. What if we wanted notes that were shorter than a beat? For our second beat here, instead of one note that lasts for the entire beat, say we wanted two notes that only lasted for half. So on the timeline, that would look like this. We'd have one note that would start at the beginning, go halfway through, and then stop. We'd have another note that would start and play for the rest of the beat. So if we wrote this using normal notation, as long as we still have that time signature figured out, the eighth note would be our half beat note. Now if we try to count this out like before, we have a bit of a problem. Counting 1, 2, 3, 4 will show us where each beat begins, which tells us where to play this note, and this note. But that's not going to show us where to play this note. So we need to know the halfway point of each beat. So when we count this, when a beat is halfway through, we'll say and. So instead of just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I like to use a little plus sign to represent the and, like that. And that's what we need to get this note in the right place. So here's what that sounds like. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now it's important to remember that my tempo didn't speed up or slow down when I started counting with ands. I'm still playing at around 120 beats per minute. I just say and when I'm halfway through. Now be careful when you're counting this yourself that you don't let everything slow down. That's easy to do. So now we can do a little more with these rhythms, but the obvious problem is that we've been ignoring this time signature issue. Unfortunately, time signatures can get pretty complicated, so they're going to get a whole lesson to themselves. So stay tuned for that.